Is the linebacker duo of Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano primed to be among the league's elite pairings? We're breaking down all the dynamics surrounding the Bills linebackers entering 2024 today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. We're going to talk Bills linebackers today on the podcast. And earlier this week, I did an entire episode on Terrel Bernard. And so we're going to talk about Terrel Bernard, of course, today. But I would point you in the direction of that episode from earlier in the week if you're looking for the big 30-minute just Terrel Bernard conversation. But I want to get into all the dynamics for this team at linebacker entering 2024. And I want to break it down like this. We'll start by getting into what makes me most excited. In segment 2, we'll talk about what I'm concerned about. And then in segment 3, I want to talk about what I'm most curious about. So let's do it. We'll start with what I'm excited about. And I think there's two main things here. It's Terrel Bernard in his second season as a starter and the return of Matt Milano. We'll start with Terrel Bernard. And again, entire episode on him earlier in the week. But what a debut season he had as the Bills' starting middle linebacker, replacing Tremaine Edmunds. One of the biggest storylines entering last season was, do the Bills have a starting caliber middle linebacker on the roster? And boy, oh boy, did Terrel Bernard answer the call. And one of the key talking points that I keep going back to as it relates to Terrel Bernard and what he did last season as a very dynamic playmaker, right? He filled up the stat sheet with splash plays. His impact was obvious. But the fact that he was able to do that in year one as a starter, in an offseason where he split reps with Tyrel Dodson and really missed the last several weeks, missed all of preseason with that hamstring injury. How he still performed under those circumstances, not to mention Matt Milano goes down in week 5, not to mention Deion Jones goes down in week 5, but comes back later in the season. Those are two of the most important people for a middle linebacker, his running mate and his nose tackle. And Terrel Bernard had the season that he had as an inexperienced player that was under-repped without the two most important players he needs around him. He still had the season that he had. So yeah, I'm real excited about that guy in his second season as a starter where he's the incumbent. There's an expectation that he's going to take a step and really become one of the key faces of this defense. And I'm very excited to see how he builds upon an outstanding 2023 campaign. I'm also incredibly excited for the return of Matt Milano. That dude's a good football player. I know we didn't get a chance to see him beyond week 5 last year, but don't forget what that guy can do on a football field. The NFL actually released in the last few days a YouTube video that was 24 minutes of Matt Milano highlights. And I watched that. I think it was Tuesday night this week. I watched it, and boy, I was just smiling ear to ear thinking about the type of impact he can have and the type of impact he's had. And the NFL looks at Matt Milano as one of the elite linebackers. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN has been putting out the results. Really, he's been polling NFL executives and coaches to get the top 10 players at every position. And he just recently dropped linebackers, and Matt Milano came in fourth. This is no small deal. I think when you consider all the changes and additions to the Buffalo Bills year over year, the return of Matt Milano is as significant of an addition as you're going to find. And he's coming off of a tibial plateau fracture, which I think he should be fine. Maybe there's going to be a little bit of rust to shake off, but this isn't like an ACL. It's not a ligament. I think that helps a ton. And so Matt Milano should be positioned well to return to form and be that high-level performer that we've enjoyed for so long. And so it's Terrel Bernard in year 2. It's the return of Matt Milano, but it's also the duo. It's the pair. It's those guys playing together for an entire season. I think it has a chance to be a very special pair. One of the best duos in all of football. And you think about what Sean McDermott did in Carolina with Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis, and I'm going to stop short of calling Matt Milano and Terrel Bernard the second coming of Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis. But how those guys were used in coverage, how those guys were used with pressure looks was really, really good. And I'm excited to see some of that replicated with this group. And also, we know this was very much the vision for the Bills' defense. They wanted to have two matchup linebackers next to each other. They wanted to transition away from that traditional Mike linebacker like a Tremaine Edmunds, and they wanted two matchup guys. We heard that from Brandon Beane. We heard that from Bobby Babich. We've heard that from Sean McDermott. Now we get this opportunity to see this fully come to fruition this year, where you had it for 4.5 games, but then Milano goes down and Tyrel Dodson comes back in, and Tyrel Dodson's much more of a traditional downhill player. And so I'm excited to see the vision for that group come together, in addition to there being a deeper group of defensive tackles in front of them. One of my favorite things about the Bills in 2024 is I no longer have to watch Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips. And those guys play a lot of snaps. And I think Austin Johnson and Deshaun Williams are just better players. I think that helps the linebackers. So this conversation about why you should be excited about the Bills linebackers in 2024, it's about Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano. Now, that's not it, but I think that's obviously the lead conversation to have. Some other things that have me excited is the veteran depth options that exist. I don't have to remind you, the Bills linebacker depth was really challenged last year. And through that, Tyrel Dodson was able to play and showcase himself well and got a nice little contract with the Seattle Seahawks. But by the end of the season, you're without Matt Milano. Terrel Bernard can't go in the divisional round against the Chiefs, and Tyrel Dodson's playing on one arm with a shoulder injury. AJ Klein, you remember that? The dude's on his way to a family vacation. He's retired, and the next thing you know, he's starting playoff games for the Buffalo Bills. Having some veteran depth options, like a Nicholas Morrow and a Deion Jones, positions you a lot better than you were last year. And I'm not promising you that those are top-level performers, but I think they are sufficient level depth players that are veterans that have played a lot of football. And Deion Jones, I mean, there was a stretch where he was one of the premier linebackers in the NFL. He had some shoulder problems, and that's hurt him over the last few seasons, but I thought he started to play a lot better with Carolina last season. And what encourages me about that is we're talking about a shoulder. It's not like a leg injury or anything like that. And so I have a level of optimism there. And Nicholas Morrow, I've watched for the last few years, whether it was with the Raiders or the Bears or the Eagles, and I've always thought to myself, he's a decent player. I like having those guys in the mix. And I also appreciate that those players are stylistically similar to the vision that the Bills have in Terrel Bernard, in Matt Milano as matchup type linebackers. It's not a situation now where if you have to rely on those guys to play snaps for you on defense, that you're bringing in a skill set like a Tyrel Dodson that doesn't really fit what you want to do defensively. And all of a sudden you got to do all these crazy things to compensate for what Tyrel Dodson can't do. You remember it. Long and late downs. Jordan Poyer goes from safety to linebacker. Tyrel Dodson goes off the field, and then Taylor Rapp came in at safety. You don't have to do that when you have more similar style players filling out your depth. And so that is definitely something that I'm excited about. I got another thing that I want to get into in terms of what I'm excited about before I talk about what I'm concerned about. We're going to do all that here on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with me. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours, and 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So just to finish up the why I'm excited conversation, we discussed Terrel Bernard, the return of Matt Milano, them as a pair, the veteran depth options that are in place, but also there's some developing depth that really intrigues me. And of course, it's recent draft picks in each of the last 3 years, going back to Baylon Spector, who was a 6th-round pick 3 years ago. And obviously there's been a ton of injuries there, and it's concerning. And your best ability is your availability, and there's plenty to be worried about with that as it relates to Baylon Spector. But I think there's been flashes from him that intrigue me. I think there's special teams upside, and he's an experienced depth player, relative to the team that, even last season when the Bills did go 3 linebackers, the first guy in was Baylon Spector. So there's something that this coaching staff likes about him, and I'm curious to see what that means in his 3rd season. Also, Dorian Williams, and I'm going to talk a lot more about Dorian Williams here in just a moment, but his 2nd season as a 3rd-round pick, physically gifted. He's fast and physical. Got a few chances to play last year, and I thought you saw a lot of issues with processing, but there's a lot to unlock there, and the physical traits are off the charts. And so his 2nd season is intriguing, not to mention this year's linebacker draft pick, Edefwan Ulafosio, good player for Washington for a number of seasons. I really like this college tape. Injuries were the issue with him. I think he's an intriguing developmental depth piece. So you got 3 guys here that are very intriguing to me as developmental depth options, not to mention your 2 veterans in Nicholas Morrow and Deion Jones, not to mention your exciting pair of starters in Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano. Plenty to like there. Let's transition into what I'm concerned about. And I want to start with this, and it is a Dorian Williams conversation. And the concern for me is the path for Dorian Williams to be meaningful on this roster as a 3rd-round pick. I'm pretty sure he's going to provide depth. He's going to be a good special teams player. We're talking about the number 89 pick in the draft. What is the path for him to become a meaningful player? And obviously there's two roadblocks for him, and it's Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano. Matt Milano is signed through the 2026 season. And this is going to be a little sidebar on Milano and age. He signed through 2026. This is going to be his age 30 season. He actually turns 30 on July 28th. So in a few days, he will turn 30 years old. There are several linebackers in the NFL that are performing at an extremely high level well into their 30s. I'll give you some examples. Levante David with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Been an exceptional player. He's entering his age 34 season. Demario Davis with the New Orleans Saints. I think he's played the position as good as anybody over the last 5 years. He's entering his age 35 season. CJ Mosley with the Jets is really bounced back after getting injured his first season with the Jets. He's entering his age 32 season. So that gives me a lot of encouragement for a guy like Matt Milano to continue performing at a high level into his early to mid 30s. Not to mention Thomas Davis, played a long time under Sean McDermott, was a Pro Bowler, ages 32, 33, and 34, 2 of those seasons with Sean McDermott. I don't feel like age is going to restrict Matt Milano yet, right? At some point it will, right? Father Time is completely undefeated. So it will happen at some point, but is there 2, 3, 4 more good seasons for Matt Milano? Yeah, I think so. So there's that piece of it, right? So you got to get Matt Milano and Terrel Bernard out of your way. I think Terrel Bernard is an extension candidate. We'll talk about that in just a moment after the season. But where and how does Dorian Williams become a meaningful piece of this defense as a third-round pick? The other piece of this, and this is kind of a sidebar that ties it all together, is you've seen currently in the NFL a fair amount of, air quotes, late bloomers at the position, guys that have become very good starting players, but it didn't necessarily happen right away. I have a long list of those. I'll give them to you. Robert Spillane, what he did with the Raiders this past season. It was his 6th season in the NFL before he really became an impact starter. Caden Ellis, what he's doing with the Falcons, his 4th season it took until he became a meaningful player. Azeez Al-Shaair, a depth player for the 49ers for a while, was behind Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, goes to Tennessee, becomes a good-looking starter. Now he's going to be in line to be the Mike linebacker for the Houston Texans. That didn't all happen until his 3rd season. Bobby Okereke, didn't happen until his 3rd season. Frankie Louvu, not until his 5th season. Tyrel Dodson, took until year 4 for him to get that opportunity, and he's parlayed that into a starting role with the Seattle Seahawks. EJ Speed with the Colts took until his 5th season. Quincy Williams, a standout linebacker for the Jets, took until his 3rd season. So there's no reason to feel like if it doesn't happen this year, which it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't. Your expectation should not be for Dorian Williams to play over Terrel Bernard or Matt Milano. If it doesn't happen this season, it's okay. He just turned 23 years old in June. He signed through 2026. The Bills could, if they wanted to, get out of Matt Milano's contract after the 2025 season. Now, he signed through 2026, and the Bills could certainly have him play that out. They could extend him. There's options. But don't stick a fork in Dorian Williams quite yet, even if it doesn't happen next year. There's plenty of examples of linebackers that it took a few years for them to become starters, and then when they did, they became very good players. All of the guys I just mentioned to you, every single one, have received nice contract extensions. Dorian Williams could fall in that mold very easily. So that's something that I'm concerned about, but how does it happen? It's fascinating. The next thing, concern might be the too aggressive of a word here, but I want to get into extending Terrel Bernard, and I certainly did this on the Terrel Bernard podcast earlier in the week, but he is extension eligible after this season. And if Terrel Bernard goes out and has the season I think he's going to have, you don't hesitate here. You get that contract extension done after this season. He will never be less expensive than he will be after this year. Get it done. Right now, he signed through 2025. But I would get that contract done next offseason when he's extension eligible. And what's interesting about that is if you consider what I said about Matt Milano and how the Bills can get out of his deal after 2025, if you extend Terrel Bernard, you're talking about the bigger cap hits starting to come in 2026, which is right when you have to make that decision on Matt Milano and right where you could be ushering in Dorian Williams' opportunity to start. So just trying to see the vision here. That's what I'm thinking about. Dorian Williams is young. There's plenty of late bloomers at linebacker. Terrel Bernard is extension eligible after this season, but the cap hits don't really start until 2026, which is right when Matt Milano is due for a decision on his deal in terms of the opportunity to get out of that contract. So you can talk yourself into this concern that, well, should you really pay two linebackers top of market money? Well, you're not really going to do that based on how those deals stagger. There's a whole side conversation to have about Dorian Williams and maximizing rookie contracts and all that. I get that piece of it. But the reality is this situation, and as you kind of peek into the future, that's what comes to mind for me. All right, I do have two more things that I'm concerned about. We'll get to that on the other side of it, in addition to what I'm curious about as it relates to the Bills linebackers entering 2024. So be sure to stick with me. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. And they've got some fun Bills futures bets that you can check out. Here's three that really stand out to me as some exciting opportunities. You can get Greg Rousseau at plus 470 to get 10 or more sacks during the regular season. So if you think this is the first double-digit sack season of Greg Rousseau's career, plus 470. How about this one? They have the Bills at plus 165 to sweep the Jets. So if the Bills are going 2-0 against the Jets this year, you can get that at plus 165. And here's a fun one. This is at plus 800. Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and Khalil Shakir to score 5 or more touchdowns during the regular season. You can get that at plus 800. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, I do have two more things that I'm concerned about that I want to mention. Then we'll get into what I'm curious about. What I'm concerned about next is Matt Milano's return from injury. I think it's going to be okay, but we got to find out, right? He did have a significant injury. It's been a long road back. How does he perform? And we've seen some disappointing results, right? We've had some Bills players come back from injuries in recent seasons, whether it's Von Miller or Tre'Davious White or going back to like Harrison Phillips. Trent Murphy, remember that guy? Sometimes they don't look great in that first season back. Now, those were all ligament issues. This is a tibial plateau fracture. You feel better about that. Still want to see it. And the last thing, and it wouldn't be me talking concerns about the Bills linebackers and defense without mentioning tackling. The Bills linebackers, for all the plays that they make and how good they are tackle missers. Terrel Bernard last season had a missed tackle rate of 15.6%, which is insanely high. And in terms of pure volume, he had the most missed tackles in the NFL among off-ball linebackers that played at least 700 snaps. Matt Milano, historical tackle misser. a career missed tackle rate of 15.2%. I mean, that's crazy high. You'd love to see that under 10, if not in half. And it's not like there's variance. I mean, every year he's bad. Between 12.7% and 18.6% is where the missed tackle rate has fallen for Matt Milano across his 7 seasons. And so you gotta get guys on the ground. You can't just concede yards after a tackle attempt that frequently. It's going to hurt your defense. And I think you've watched the Bills defense. You know that it hurts the defense. So can we shore this up somehow? Would be nice. All right. So that's what I'm concerned about. It's the path for Dorian Williams to being meaningful, extending Terrel Bernard, Milano's return from injury, and tackling. What am I curious about? We'll close out today's podcast by diving into that. The first one is this never-ending conversation about, will the Bills incorporate 3 linebacker sets more frequently? They're a base nickel team. They run high percentages of nickel. Makes sense when you have a Taron Johnson. It makes sense when you consider how good the Bills defense has been. But as the NFL and the good offenses in the NFL are shifting to more and more heavy personnel, more tight ends, more running backs on the field, is the corresponding move for the Bills and other teams to play more 3 linebacker sets. I mean, you're going to play the 49ers, the Dolphins twice, the Ravens, the Lions, the Chiefs, Texans, Jaguars, Patriots twice, Jets twice. Those are all heavy personnel offenses. Do you have a plan to play more 3 linebacker stuff? We'll find out. And if you do, the next thing is, who is linebacker 3? Is it an experienced veteran like Nicholas Morrow or Deion Jones? Is it Dorian Williams? Is it the longest tenured guy in Baylon Spector? I think you have a really fascinating conversation and camp battle to figure out who that is. And so earmark that for something to pay attention to during training camp. The next one that I'm curious about is the kickoff rules and roster numbers. Did an entire podcast this week breaking down the new kickoff rules. I speculated over a lot of different things. But specifically to linebackers, how many linebackers do the Bills roster, and does the kickoff rule impact things? Historically, and that means before the new kickoff rule, under Sean McDermott, the Bills have typically rostered 6 linebackers. And I've seen some people put together 53-man roster projections for the Bills, and they're only keeping 5 linebackers. I don't understand that. Maybe it's true, but if historically they keep 6 and the new kickoff rule demands more from linebackers on special teams, I don't feel like this is a situation where things are aligning towards it being a year where they keep less linebackers than they traditionally do. So I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. And the very last thing that I want to mention in terms of things that I'm curious about, it's a specific player, and it's Joe Andreessen. And I'm going to stop short of promising you or predicting you that Joe Andreessen makes the Bills roster. But he's a player that I'm going to be paying attention to. And I think he'll have a role on the practice squad. And the Bills have had a nice little pipeline here of UB to the Buffalo Bills. Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram. I think both those guys will be on the 53-man roster this year. Cam Lewis has been. They've both been key players on the practice squad. Joe Andreessen could be the next up. He was invited for a tryout during rookie minicamp. That turned into an undrafted free agent contract. He's got really good size, 6'1", 240 pounds. Ran 4.64 in the 40-yard dash, 38-inch vertical jump, 10'2" broad jump, 4.22 short shuttle, 7.21 3-cone, did 32 bench press reps at 225. His relative athleticism score is a 9.35. A perfect is a 10. So, this dude's got some significant athleticism, and he's 240 pounds. Grew up in Depew, went to Lancaster High School, 2-time All-State linebacker. goes to Bryant University and plays there for 5 seasons. He's an FCS All-American in 2022. Grad transfers to UB. He played there in 2023. Had 90 tackles to lead the team, 12 tackles for loss to lead the team, 2 pass breakups, a forced fumble, had 20 pressures and 50 pass rush snaps. I mean, consider me curious about that. So I'll be paying attention to him at training camp, and he'll get a lot of run during the preseason, and just kind of curious to see what he does and where he lands. And if he's on the practice squad, is he one of these guys that you look at in 2 years from now as the next Cam Lewis, the next Jamarcus Ingram in the UB to Buffalo Bills pipeline? So pretty interesting to me. So there you have it, folks. All the dynamics for the Bills linebackers entering the 2024 season. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you'll come back. I hope that you'll subscribe. I also would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.